But anyways, back to who Ron DeSantis wants to overthrow in the upcoming presidential election, which he might actually enter. There's some news on the Joe Brandon front. First, with regards to this debt limit manufactured crisis over some parliamentary bullshit that Biden could choose to dispense with, but decide he's going to play along with regarding him hitting our debt limit. We should just not have one of those. You want to lower the debt and deficit, you tax rich people. Biden had been talking a tough game about not going to cut Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. So tough that you're like, why are you saying that so much? And why aren't you just stopping after no cuts?
Mm-hmm.
And it's unclear now, so we won't be too definite. But what actually the door's been opened for some cuts, and it's things like work, which by the way aren't cuts. Like it involves a massive bureaucracy to harass people
I mean,
that are desperate.
basically what it does is it lets the state deny people services that they are entitled to, right?
Exactly. Right, exactly. And so they're talking about work requirements now, and I just feel it's sickening that at no point was there intervening stage where like the Democrats thought, oh, maybe we like bring up all these massive tax cuts for rich people.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's like, oh, we want to get serious and sensible. Well, the serious and sensible thing is to make people working that haven't
No,
found
to
a
give the
capitalist.
Republican Party basically everything that they want.
I
And
mean,
like,
exactly. And you have to wonder, like, how much do Democrats not want this either?
I mean, this is like what we're getting down to fundamentally. I know we're going to talk about the UAW thing in just a second, but like we're entering this season again where if you say anything about Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, then this loud chorus comes out and says, well, what about Trump? I'm sorry, friends. Like, it's 2023 at this point. Like, I thought that was a ludicrous argument back in 2015, 2016. But like, we are now starting to approach like a decade of this where, you know, we can watch as our rights sort of get pulled back. We can watch as working class people's lives get worse. And you can't just keep on bringing up this specter of Trump to say we can't criticize the Democratic Party or that we can't be putting pressure on what they're doing because, you know, if the argument is like, well, life's going to get worse, or we might lose things like Medicare and Medicaid under a Trump, right? Well, what's the argument when we basically see these things continue to be under threat and continue to be rolled back when the thing that you guys are arguing for happens, right? When the Democrats win the big election. And something fundamentally needs to shift beyond just sort of putting the right away, you know, in a presidential election every once in a while. Like the Democratic Party fundamentally is a party that is willing to make these kinds of cuts and
Yep.
these kind of sacrifices, you know, in our name, right? They're not the ones
I
who are going
mean,
to be
it's
losing out
so
on the
yeah.
healthcare, right? Which is why it's so sick.
That's the funny thing about language because you say they're making these sacrifices. It's like no, they're going home and eating ice cream,
Yeah.
and everyone, a whole bunch of other people's lives get a bunch more pressed, and that's just American business as usual. And so that news, I think, made me especially greet this new Paul Prescott piece in Jacobin. UAW is right to withhold its endorsement of Joe Biden. And specifically, they're citing all this money with regards to the Inflation Reduction Act. But Biden needs to make sure that this is union labor with regards to electric vehicles. We've discussed this on the show before, and this is like the time to do this. I mean, you saw what happened when the rail workers did the Democrats a solid and say, hey, we'll wait till after the midterms to make this rail strike an issue. They fucked them. You got to
Mhm.
make it now. You got like strike while the iron's hot. And so, yeah, none of that, you know. And by the way, it's not like UAW's like toying with the idea that they're going to endorse Trump, right?
Mhm.
They're clear about that too. But it should cost something. And I mean, I think a great sign from Sean Fain and UAW.
No, I mean, I think in this the Paul Prescott piece was a great retelling of it. People should definitely read it. But I mean, I think it hits at something that hopefully we're starting to see more from organized labor is that they're not just going to rubber stamp, you know, Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, which is a shift that just desperately needs to happen, right? You could talk about what people might need to do when you get into a general election, right? But at a certain point, if those people aren't held accountable, they will continue to wage war on working class people, right? Because it's like this idea that a lot of people have that like the Democratic and the Republican Party, it's sort of like gradient, right? Like there's like our politics and then there's like the left liberal politics, and then there's the Republican politics. When is incorrect. When what functionally the Democratic and the Republican Party are two parties that represent the interests of capital, two parties that are very, very comfortable with seeing living standards for working class people decline. And the Democratic Party traditionally had some more union support. But as we've seen, and this is the really frightening thing about Joe Biden's presidency, is that their strategy that they're trying to build up around him and the new chapter of the Democratic Party is not trying to win back labor, is not trying to win back working people, but rather trying to pull away at wealthy voters in the suburbs, particularly in the South. Right. So then whose class interests are the ones that are listened to the most by the Biden Democratic Party? It's wealthy professionals, right? So understanding that, yes, the Republican Party represents the bosses and the elites, um, and but so does the Democratic Party. And this idea that the role of unions and organized labor and working class politics right now is to sort of shut up and sit down as Biden actively does things, for example, like the railroad strike, blocking the railroad strike, right? Again, I'll just say this for the thousandth time because I think a lot of people forget this. This was not some act of God. This was not something that was forced upon him by the Republican Party. This was something that Joe Biden said to Congress. I need you guys to pass. I need you guys to pass something on this, right? He brought this into motion. It wasn't something that was forced upon him. He took the active role in denying people their right to withhold their labor in order to get a better contract, right? And you can't just take this deal from them in perpetuity, which a lot of liberals basically are arguing that, like, because we dislike the right, which we do, and we think the right is a threat to this country and to working people, which we do, therefore we should accept whatever the Democratic Party does or wants to do to working people. That is a recipe for further declines in the living standards of working people, further declines in the union movement. And it's really good to start to see members of unions, particularly unions as powerful and embedded as the UAW, saying, no, we're not going to play this game anymore until y'all start showing up for us. And the stuff here is simple, right? That they're demanding.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly. This isn't even like the PRO Act,
Yeah.
right? This is like, hey, you know how you're giving these industries a massive amount of cash? Can we like make sure they don't use that to just undermine the like labor victories over the past century? Is that too much to fucking ask?
Yeah, I mean, and again, just to be very clear, what they're saying is if the government is going to be pushing forward a project like IRA, that is going to be trying to encourage more electric vehicles, don't let the so don't let the big three, the big car companies, use this to undermine labor. This is simple for a president, by the way, who likes to tout himself as quote unquote Union Joe. Simple as day, and the fact that this is controversial for anybody is ridiculous, and I'm happy to see figures in the UAW push back on this finally,
Yeah.
because it's been too long of just rubber stamping, Democratic Party politicians without demanding that they start showing up and fighting for working people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, folks, we got some really cool stuff coming up in the next few weeks on Left Reckoning, and I just want to remind folks in a second we're gonna have Vivek Chibber on the program, and we're going to be talking about false consciousness, imperialism, and what the state of the left is now that Bernie Sanders is not going to be running for president anymore. But don't forget, after that, we're going to have Matt Huber on the program. Which we're always really excited for, and he's going to be in the post game, so be able to leave calls and questions for him. And we're going to be talking about some of his critics who've been criticizing his great book, Climate Change as Class War, particularly one that was in Historical Materialism, the journal, which I'm really looking forward to having Matt on to talk about that. And if you have any questions or things you might be wanting to ask him, be sure to sign up at patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get access to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry to double back to the segment.
Yeah.
But there's one thing I did, that's not just theoretical what you're saying about the preferred voter of the Democratic Party leadership. Bill Clinton, the Democratic Leadership Council, explicitly that was strategy about with regards to like college educated voters and things like that. But as recently as 2016, Chuck Schumer was in the headlines
Hmm.
saying for every voter that Trump picks up in certain demographics, we'll pick up two in the suburbs. And they did not. And
Yeah.
so, I think if you're concerned, like you should be a little bit more open to challenge to those types of folks.
No, I mean, I think so, and like I think it's very important that again, this isn't like a theory on our part. This is something that's becoming explicit from the Democratic Party, and like they may have some success at times, like in a state like Georgia. I think it's incredibly dangerous and damaging in a state like Texas, where, by the way, I don't have the email up yet, but the Texas Democratic Party. I mean, of course, they got to pump hit their chest a couple times in a fundraising email. But they're basically saying, "Oh, it looks like Texas is going to turn blue in 2024." Something I've been hearing my entire adult
Yeah, it
life.
sounds familiar.
Believe it when we see it. But again, folks, if you want to be joining us for the conversation with Matt Huber, be sure to join us in the postgame at patreon.com/leftreckoning.